Way back several weeks ago when we started this class, I asked you about topics in chemistry that might interest you, and I know a lot of you said chemical reactions. So we're actually finally going to talk, now that we've talked about atoms and molecules and moles, now we can talk a little more about chemical reactions. And actually we use chemical equations. I just love a lot of things about science and a lot of things about chemistry, but in order to describe a chemical reaction, actually we represent them using what we call a chemical equation. So how do we know a chemical reaction has occurred, or what is a chemical reaction? And this is one of those deja vu slides. It's like, oh my gosh, I think we already talked about that, and we did. We said basically earlier that you know a chemical change has occurred instead of a physical change if new substances are formed. So I'm just going to say new substances are formed. So actually you're going to see that in these chemical reactions. Now one of the things, and I don't know how much I've talked about it along the way, but we've talked about the conservation. Matter is conserved, energy is conserved, everything is conserved. So actually, especially with these, these basic chemical reactions, the nuclei are going to remain intact. So actually, when a chemical reaction occurs, all the atoms you have over here are represented or show up in the atoms over here. We kind of write and read chemical equations representing a chemical reaction from left to right. So what we start with are the atoms that we end with, although when new substances are formed. So this might look familiar. So we talked about how do you know something new is formed? Well, for instance, we have a color change here. Must be a new substance, right? In this case, we have two clear substances actually formed something that was cloudy. Again, kind of what we call a precipitate. An indication new substances are formed. Let's see, new substances formed. You guys see the gas there? Yep, I do. You guys had an observation lab where you knew a chemical reaction had occurred because you saw a gas given off. Now, the generation of heat may or may not be an indication that a chemical reaction has occurred. So it can go either way. The generation of light, I'd like to say, may or may not be an indication that a chemical reaction has occurred. So this is to kind of qualify all of those kind of eye-catching images on the previous slide, that only if you know what's happening on the atomic scale via some sort of chemical reaction, only if you know the chemical, oops, my slide's not advancing. There we go. This is the slide I thought I had coming up. But no matter how kind of interesting something looks, you actually have to understand the chemistry that's going on to see if that new substances are formed. Looks can be deceiving. Okay, so only if you have new substances formed has a chemical reaction occurred. So then we're bumping up against an assignment slide.